أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته ليلة الجمعة مبارك. So as usual for a Thursday we're going to start with the recitation of Qur'an, and we've been looking at Juz 29, and today we will look at Surah Al-Ma'arij, which is Surah number 70. We will then look at a little bit of Dua al-Kumayl. We will look at the A to Z of Islam. And today we will look at a little bit, a glance at the life of Imam Sadiq, because it is his wafat, and we need to look at it. And then obviously we will look at section 4 of Surah Yaseen. So let's start with Surah Al-Ma'arij. And before we recite it, let's learn a little bit about it. Surah number 70. Now, Ma'arij means the stairway, to climb up. See, it comes from the word araja, which means to climb stairs. Allah is one who possesses great heights. He's like Allah, he's up there. So he will take his creation step by step to their full potential if they let him. Now the surah is also called Al-Mawaqi. Mawaqi means that which is about to come, that which is impending, and it refers to, you will see in how this surah starts. It's a unique start about the impending punishment. My goodness. So what's the focus? The focus of the surah, the first thing, is that there was an immediate response to the one who challenged Imama. And I'll tell you the story in a minute. So Imama is succession to the Prophet, and the person who also obviously then challenged Qiyamah, which is accountability. It also talks about the state of those who are greedy, who hoard things, don't want to share on the day of Qiyamah. And then it gives a list of qualities of those who will be in Jannah, who are righteous. But first, let's look at some benefits, and then I'll tell you the story about where Ma'arij, or where the beginning comes from when I said it is the immediate response to the one who asked for punishment or who challenged Imama. If you read this surah, then you get safety from shaitan. If you're imprisoned, it doesn't literally mean in prison, but if you imprisoned yourself in anything. I was reading a quote today which said that when you attach yourself to something, then it's like you've put yourself in prison with that attachment. So it could be a prison like that. And your sins get covered if you recite this surah. So let's see what the surah says and starts off with, so we understand this. Allah starts with a very different starting. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sa'ala sa'ilun bi'adabin waqi'. The one who continually asked questions, and not because he wanted to learn, but because he wanted to mock. He's asking for the punishment. That means he's demanding punishment. Can you imagine? So let's see what happens. See, when the Prophet announced Imama, he announced, Man kuntu mawlahu fahada aliyun mawlahu, on the day of Qadir. This man comes up to him and says, you told us to pray. You told us to fast. You told us to give zakah. You told us to go for Hajj. And you appointed your cousin now to rule over us. Is this from your Rabb? If it is, then just send rocks from the sky. You know what happened? Yeah, you're right. A rock came and immediately he was killed. Right? So he actually challenged it. To challenge the Imama, he just, that's sort of things he did. So that's the first ayat. So we've divided the surah into 5 sections. The first one is the cynical person. See, people ask questions for various reasons. Sometimes they ask questions to find out, which is what you should do. But if you're asking questions just to put somebody down or to mock them, oh my goodness, shouldn't be doing that. Section 2 is, it talks about those who are greedy on the day of Qiyamah. This is ayah 4 to 18. Then you have the nature of the human being. The human being gets sad when there's difficulty, and then gets stingy when he gets lots of stuff. So section 4 then talks about how to become good, or what are the qualities of those who are righteous and will be in Jannah. For example, they're very constant in their salah. That means in their wajib salah, they're constant. They always pray. It's not like sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. They share their wealth. They believe in accountability. They are decent people. They're trustworthy. And they establish salah in their lives, and they guard their salah. And finally, section 5 is about those, when the Prophet was saying these things, they would tell him, oh yeah, really? Were you telling us that we're going to go to Jahannam? And they used to surround him and mock him. So it's saying what's going to happen to them. They're going to be disgraced. So if you found the surah in your Qur'ans, have you got it? So let's recite it together. That's Surah Al-Ma'arij, Surah number 70, okay? And let's recite it together. You there with me? Okay. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. Loudly with me so that even the walls of your houses can hear. Okay, let's start. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سأل سائل بعذاب واقع للكافرين ليس له دافع من الله ذي المعارج تعرج الملائكة والروح إليه في يوم كان مقداره 50,000 سنة فاصبر صبرا جميلا إنهم يرونه بعيدا ونراه قريبا يوم تكون السماء كالمحل وتكون الجبال كالعهن ولا يسأل حميم حميما يبصرونهم يود المجرم لو يفتدي من عذاب يومئذ ببنيه وصاحبتي وأخي وفصيلتي التي تؤوي ومن في الأرض جميعا ثم ينجي كلا إنها لظى نزاعة للشوى تدعو من أدبر وتولى وجمع فأوعى إن الإنسان خلق هلوعا إذا مسه الشر جزوعا وإذا مسه الخير منوعا إلا المصلين الذين هم على صلاتهم دائمون والذين في أموالهم حق معلوم للسائل والمحروم والذين يصدقون بيوم الدين والذين هم من عذاب ربهم مشفقون إن عذاب ربهم غير مأمون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون والذين هم لأماناتهم وعهدهم راعون والذين هم بشهاداتهم قائمون والذين هم على صلاتهم يحافظون أولئك في جنات مكرمون فما للذين كفروا قبلك مهطعين عن اليمين وعن الشمال عزين أيطمع كل امرئ منهم أن يدخل جنة نعيم كلا إنا خلقناهم مما يعلمون فلا أقسم برب المشارق والمغارب إنا لقادرون على أن نبدل خيرا منهم وما نحن بمسبوقين فذرهم يخوضوا ويلعبوا حتى يلاقوا يومهم الذي يوعدون يوم يخرجون من الأجداث سراعا كأنهم إلى نصب يوفضون خاشعة أبصارهم ترهقهم ذلة ذلك اليوم الذي كانوا يوعدون صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق الرسول الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So we're going to look at Dua al-Kumayl now. And you remember, just as a reminder, it's Dua al-Khizr, which was taught by Imam Ali alayhi salam to Kumayl ibn Ziyad al-Nakha'i. Okay? So we also know that he's known as Sahib Sir, the companion of the secret, the owner of the secrets of Imam Ali. And he was killed by Hajjaj. We talked about that. So today we're going to look at section 4. And if you've got Dua al-Kumayl in front of you, so I'd like you to turn to it And let's look at the bit we're going to look at now. We're going to try and understand it before we recite it, and then we'll recite it from the beginning up to the end of section 4. So here we're saying Allahumma. Okay, you got it with you? I hope you've got it there. Oh Allah, inni, indeed I. As'aluka, I ask you. Su'ala, the question, I ask you for what? Now I'm asking you something with the asking of. Now the words we use are khadi'in, mutadhallilin, khashi'in. Can you say that with me? 3 words we're describing ourselves. When we're asking Allah, we're saying, Ya Allah, this is how I'm asking you. I am khadi', mutadhallil, and khashi'. So what do they mean? Khadi'in means submissive. That means I will do what you want, Ya Allah. I submit to you. Then when we tell him mutadhallilin, we say with humility, really humble. I'm really feeling bad. And khashi'in is I'm in awe of you. You are just awesome. And I'm just looking at you and thinking, oh my goodness. So I'm asking you submissively with humility and in awe. Now what am I asking for? We say, an tusamihani. Pardon me. You know, in Swahili, I come from East Africa. And samehe means forgive me. Pardon me. An tusamihani. Forgive me. وَتَرْحَمَنِي, have mercy on me. وَتَجْعَلَنِي بِقِسْمِكَ رَاضِئًا كَانِئًا, and make me one of those people who is pleased, and qana'a is to be content, and content with my share. So you do your best, you hand it over to Allah, and then you're content. It's amazing. We'll talk about contentment in a minute. وَفِي جَمِيعِ الْأَحْوَالِ مُتَوَاضِيًا, and in every single situation, Ya Allah, make me humble. I don't want to be arrogant, ever. So in that little bit that we're asking, and it's really important we understand because we're talking to Allah, it's dua. So we got to tell him, I'll go repeat it again. Allahumma inni as'aluka, oh Allah, I ask you. So Allah, the asking of 3 things. You remember what they were? Khadi'in, mutadhallilin, khashi. Submissive, with humility and in awe. And what am I asking for? An tusamihani, wa tarhamani, وَتَجْعَلْنِي بِكِسْمِكَ رَاضِيًا قَانِيًا وَفِي جَمِيعِ الْأَحْوَالِ مُتَوَاضِيًا. Pardon me, have mercy on me, make me pleased and content, and make me humble. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2 things we're asking for, contentment and humility. Okay, so let's look at contentment first. The Prophet said, كُنْ قَانِئًا تَكُنْ أَشْكُرُ النَّاسِ, be contented so that you are the most thankful of all people. So one of the signs of somebody who's content is that we're thankful. He says contentment is an empire that never collapses. That's the Prophet. Now let's see, what are the signs of somebody who's content? So if I want to make myself content, how am I supposed to be? Well, first of all, they don't worry too much. They don't. They do their best and then they hand it over to Allah. You know, there's a wonderful saying which says, this too shall pass. We're going through a tough time these days with COVID-19, all sorts of things. But this too shall pass. There's only so much you can do, and you do your best. They assume the world is good rather than evil. They're not negative, they're always positive. They focus on the beauty of life. So they look outside, they see a ladybird, my goodness, it will make them happy. It's a sign of Allah. When it rains, they don't say, oh, it's gloomy. Oh God, no. It's going to water the plants, and my goodness, look what the rain does, it's rahmah. They don't constantly analyze life. Oh, why did this happen? It's okay. They let it go. If they can't control anything, they just let it go. They don't hold on to it. You know, sometimes we hold on to grudges of God knows 100 years ago, miles away. Why did she do this? Why? We don't even know why we do things. How are we going to know other people do things? They learn from their mistakes. They don't sit on them. They're open-minded. They're not judgmental. And they're normally optimistic rather than pessimistic. So these are people who are content. Now the next thing we looked at was humility. So humble person normally, when you see somebody who's humble, we say they're submissive, we say they're passive, we say, you know what, they're not sort of suited booted. Well, you can be suited booted and humble as well, but they're not. I remember I come from a small town called Moshi, right? And in our town, when somebody used to wear flip-flops, for example, and didn't tuck their shirt into their pants, so they wore their shirt out, and they walked sort of with their eyes on the ground, didn't sort of strut their stuff. We would say, this person is Allah. I didn't know what that meant. I remember my father one day, he told me, it means Allahi. It means they remind you of Allah because they are so humble. They're human beings as they ought to be. I'd like to tell you a story. I remember one day in the town that we lived in Moshi and in Arusha, there were some tropical rains and all the graves had sort of gone in. So all the men from everywhere went to help and sort the graves out. That means it collapsed. And I still remember my father died when I was 10, so I was very young, I was about 7. And I remember my father coming home and he just sat down and he didn't say anything. And we asked him what was going on because he'd gone to help. And he said that he was fixing the grave of somebody who was buried quite a while ago. And he said the person was just as though they'd been buried yesterday. There was not a single mark on his kafan. Kafan is your shroud. And it was like he was just sleeping there, like he was so tired. Somebody was alive. And he was the person who used to look after the mosque in Arusha. And he was very, very humble. He used to fill all the cans of water for the toilets. He used to pick people's rubbish up. And nobody really respected him the way they should. But that was him. And it was his humbleness that he always spoke to people in a humble manner. So that's really humble. Normally we look at them and we think they're passive and they're insecure, but it's quite the opposite. They're confident. That is the key to success. They keep relationships. They always put others first. These are the qualities of somebody who's humble. They listen. It's so annoying when somebody you're telling something to interrupts you and then they just go on a tangent and they don't let you speak. But humble people let you speak. They always want to learn. They say lots of thank yous. They say more you than I. So they don't keep on saying I. They accept feedback. They take responsibility and they ask for help. So when we're asking Allah here and we're telling him that I want to be humble, I want to be content, we've got to put all this in practice in our lives. So if you're ready, let's read Dua al-Kumayl. Are you ready? Okay, let's start. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma inni as'aluka birahmatika allati wasi'at kulla shay' wa biquwwatika allati qaharta biha kulla shay' وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفي بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاطئ متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا كانيا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Inshallah, we will continue with Dua al-Kumayl next week. But today, back to our A to Z of Islam. So today we will look at C. So we looked at A. Remember what A was for? That's for Allah. And we also looked at Asma al-Husna. Do you remember what B was for? B was being your best. Doing your best in absolutely everything. Now today we're going to look at C. And C in essence is charity. So I'll call it sadaqah. But it's good to call it charity because it means something you do voluntarily. It's not like khums, which you have to give. It's not like zakah. Sadaqah is literally means righteousness. Remember, it comes from the Arabic word sadaqa, sidq, which means truthfulness, sincerity, to fulfill your promise. It is a promise we make to Allah that when we believe in Him, we will share with humanity. We will be charitable, giving something to somebody without wanting anything in return, only wanting to get closer to Allah. That's what charity is all about. So let's look at some hadith and then let's have a little bit of a talk about it. So the Prophet said, if you want to be rich, if you want lots of sustenance, give charity. Imam Sadiq says, Allah gives help to a person equal in quantity to the charity they give. He said, everything has a key. And if you want sustenance, if you want lots, then give lots. Okay. He said, if somebody is ill, cure your sick by giving sadaqah, by giving charity. Remove your troubles by giving charity. Increase your sustenance with charity, because this is metaphorical. It chases away 70 shaitans. And charity goes first in the hand of Allah before it gets to the hand of the needy. There's a story that I absolutely adore. It was about Imam Sajjad. You know who Imam Sajjad is? Imam Zayn al-Abidin. So Imam Sajjad was with his companions one day, and this man comes, and he's poor. He's really poor. He's asking for money. It's really hard for people to ask. It's not easy at all. By the way, there's fuqara, and then there's miskeen. Fuqara is somebody who is in need because he has a disability, whether it's old age or refugee, he can't support himself. A miskeen is someone who is nothing, is even desperate for basics. This was a miskeen. So it comes to Imam Sajjad, and Imam Sajjad just gives him whatever he has. Then he takes the man's hand, and he kisses the man's hand, and he says, you are my muhsin. Remember that word? Muhsin. You are the one who's done me a favor. You have done ihsan on me. Do you know what ihsan means? It means somebody who gives you more than they should, more than you deserve. When the man went away, the companion says, surely it should be the other way around. You are his muhsin. You did him a favor. You gave him all that money. And Imam said, no. Who is there who will take my money, multiply it so many times, and then bank it with Allah? In other words, put it in my account with Allah. Who's going to do that for you just by giving it? Can you just imagine? So next time we give something in charity, don't think we're doing a favor. We really are not. I remember when we used to collect clothes to give to people, or we used to collect things, and people used to bring these black bags to the mosque, to the center. Inshallah, one day we'll go back there again. But they were bringing these bags, and the clothes were not folded, they were not ironed, they were just thrown in. Some of them were disgusting. And you think, how can you do this? This is what goes to Allah first. And then it comes to you. You have to give the best. And even if you are giving stuff, at least wash, clean, iron. When you give them to charity shops, you just dump them into a bag. You can't do that. Or you should have a good friend who helps you sort them out. So it's really important to understand what charity is all about. And when we give, we must give our best. Sometimes we have these boxes. I know they give us them at the center. They're beautiful. They say sadaqah on them. And we come back from outside and we got some change and we just put our change in it. It's not there to look after your change. just because your bag's getting heavy and you don't want any coppers in. So that's not what charity is about. It's about giving the best of what you have. That's what it's all about. Because remember, it goes in his hands first before it goes to the hand of the person who reaches it. And then I'd also like to talk about charity in the sense, make sure it gets there, that the box doesn't live in the front of your house or wherever you have for a long time. It's got to be able to get where it's meant to go. So lots of things that are important to think about when we think about charity. So C for charity, and remember, charity can also be a smile. It doesn't necessarily have to be money. It could be anything you have that you give that makes a difference in somebody's life. Okay. So before we go to Surah Yaseen now, I'd like to talk about Imam Sadiq. Oh my goodness, what a phenomenal personality. Now on your screens, you have a circle then. We've got circles for all the Masumeen, which makes it a bit easier. But let's start with how we're going to remember Imam Sadiq. So when you think of Imam Sadiq, what do you think? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? You may think that we're known as Ja'fari. Why? What is it about him? So every time I think of a Masoom, there is a couple of things that should stand out in your mind. Just like when we talk about any surah of the Qur'an, any surah, we talk about the focus, so we know. So when you thought of Ma'arij, immediately you saw the immediate response to the one who challenged Imam in Qiyamah. And then I told you it talks about the greedy on the day of Qiyamah. And then it talks about the qualities of those who are righteous and who will go to Jannah. So those three things come to your mind. In the same way, when you think of Imam Sadiq, you've got to think of some things. In my mind, I think education, 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 and knowledge. That's what he was all about. And then further on, that education must perfect your character. Because if you look at his hadith, all about perfection of character. So education, perfection of character. So if I think of Imam Sadiq, walk the talk. Learn, keep on learning, and then walk the talk. Okay. So let's look at his life and let's talk a little bit about him so we understand who he was. So his name is JA'far. What a beautiful name. So it means it's actually a stream. In tradition, it's a stream in Jannah. Isn't that awesome? He was born in Medina, the same date as the Prophet, 17th of Rabiul Awal, 82 after Hijrah. And his wafat is on the 25th of Shawwal, as we know today, right? So he lived for about 65 years. His dad, you all know who he was? Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. His mom was Fatima, and she's known as Farwa. Now, she was the daughter of Qasim, who was the son of Muhammad, who was the son of Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr was a companion of the Prophet, right? So let's talk a little bit about the mom, Farwa. She was absolutely phenomenal. She was known as a faqih, like really intelligent and really pious, really, really good. She was the wife of an imam. She was the mom of an imam. And she supported both imams. She was like their support. You know, you need somebody to be there as your mountain, somebody you can lean on. And they leaned on her. She was just amazing. So her dad was phenomenal, Qasim. Her grandfather, Muhammad, was the son of Abu Bakr. But after Abu Bakr dies, Asma, who was first, let me start again. So there's JA'far Tayyar. Do you know who JA'far Tayyar is? Okay. So JA'far Tayyar was married to Asma. When JA'far Tayyar was killed, and he's known as Tayyar because his arms were cut off and he had wings. He's known as JA'far Tayyar, right? So he was married to Asma. When he died, Asma married Abu Bakr and they had a son called Muhammad. When Abu Bakr dies, Asma marries Imam Ali. She was also Sayyidah Fatima's best friend. Right? So she marries Imam Ali and she brings Muhammad to the house. And he is brought up by Imam Ali. He was a phenomenal man. He was killed by Muawiyah, but phenomenal. So his granddaughter is Fatima, who's Farwa, or is Imam Sadiq's mom. There's so much more about her. Maybe you can read about her later on. So these are his parents. Now, his first 13 years of his life, can you remember 13? 0 to 13. It's not hard. Okay. So the first 13 years of his life, he's with his grandfather. His grandfather lived with them. So it's a big family. They lived all together. There's Imam Sajjad, there's Imam Baqir, and there's Imam Sadiq. So they're all living together. Why? That's how families are supposed to live. So he lived with his grandfather, and he was always learning from his grandfather. His grandfather dies when he's about 13, 14, about that age. So from that age, Up to the age of 32, he's now with his father. That's Imam Baqir. Okay? And Imam Baqir is known as Baqir, somebody who explains. Baqir is to split open knowledge, so makes things easier. So Imam Baqir started what I would call the Ahlul Bayt Institute, and he teaches there. And Imam Sadiq becomes a teacher there as well. He actually first married the granddaughter of Imam Hassan, and they had two sons, Abdullah and Ismail. So Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq managed this institute, I might want to call it the Ahlul Bayt Institute. And Makkah and Medina literally become intellectual learning centers. When Imam Baqir dies at the age of 32, remember he's poisoned. This is now when Imam Sadiq becomes the Imam. So Imam Baqir is 57, Imam Sadiq is 32. So we've divided his life into 0 to 13, 13 to 32, and now 32 to 65. 3 parts. Can you remember that? 0 to 13 with his grandfather, 13 to 32 with his father, and now he's 30 to 65. He is an Imam. So what does he do first? He continues the school that his father has started. And because the Khalifas are the people in charge, they were fighting each other. There was the Banu Umayyah and there was the Banu Abbas. And they were fighting within themselves. There was so much infighting going on that they forgot about Imam Sadiq. Because normally they would focus on the Ahlul Bayt and they were really, really mean. So Imam Sadiq was born somewhere near the end of Banu Umayyah, middle end of Banu Umayyah, and he sees about 10 of the rulers, and then he also sees the rise of the Banu Abbas. Maybe if you read history, you will see this. So he starts this university in Medina. He teaches in 3 places, at home, in the Mosque of Medina, and when he goes for Hajj in Makkah. And we're told he had 4,000 students who came from globally, from everywhere, absolutely everywhere. The moment they heard Imam Sadiq was teaching, they came, they were there. He taught fiqh, tafsir, hadith, chemistry, kalam, medicine. Kalam is theology. And remember, and he also taught philosophy because the Greek philosophers were having their influence here. There's so much he taught. Maybe when you go to the Science Museum, you will hear about Jabir ibn Hayyan with the properties of mercury. That's one of his students. I mean, all the major schools of thought, the Hanafi, the Shafi, the Maliki, if you look at them, their heads, either them or their teachers, were taught by Imam Sadiq. It's amazing. In fact, the government got so angry that if you went to Imam Sadiq to ask a question, you'd be fined. But if you went to others, then they would give you an incentive. They would give you money to go and ask others. That's how much they were against him. We're called Ja'fari because we follow the fiqh of Imam Sadiq. My goodness, he was just the most awesome teacher on the planet at his time. So literally, when we say that they're all like the Prophet, this was a teacher. This is a phenomenal teacher. Let's look at his character. What was he like? If somebody were to describe you and me, what would they say? So how did they describe him? He was a hard worker. Not only did he teach, but he worked in the fields as well. He was a merchant as well. That means he did business as well. One thing about him, and I loved reading this, he dressed immaculately. He really dressed well. When people heard him talk, they didn't want to move away. They were spellbound. They just wanted to hear him all the time. And he organized education. And he made it easy. For example, he organized the Qur'an in chronological order as well, so we know how things are. Tafsir was organized. Hadith was organized. Ahkam was organized. He taught an organized way of learning the Arabic language. He taught an organized timeline in how to teach the seerah or the life of the Prophet. He was just phenomenally organized, and that's what teachers are supposed to be. And there's a lot to learn from him. But I'd like to end with, he was poisoned by Mansur Dawanaki, by the way. But I'd like to end with a did you know, which I really like. So Imam's eldest son was called Ismail. Ismail died in a place called Urayz, which was outside Medina whilst Imam was alive. He was in his early 30s. Now, when people from Yemen used to come to visit Imam, Ismail used to be sitting near Imam. And they always used to think that he was a really, really good person, really righteous person. Everybody thought that's going to be the Imam. And remember, there was no instant messaging or instant news that we have today. When people got news, it'd be months later. It had to be somebody who had to ride there and take the news. So it wasn't like we have it today. So when Ismail died, Imam brought him to Medina to bury him. And on the way, he stopped 2 or 3 times and he lifted the cover and he said, "Oh my God, Ismail has died." And people thought, my goodness, he is so sad. He was sad, but more than that. But he was trying to tell them that, Ismail has died. There was a reason. But the people from Yemen and the people from other places who had seen Ismail with Imam were convinced that the Imam after Imam Sadiq was Ismail. And they called themselves Ismailis. And then they had people who had different leaders who took over. And then at the 18th Imam, they split into two. So there was the Nizaris and there was the Musta'alis. And the Nizaris today are called Aga Khanis, and the Musta'alis are known as Bukharas. And that is what they believe. But this happened with Imam Sadiq's son Ismail. But then I have a favorite hadith. There's so many ahadiths from Imam Sadiq. I mean, I'm not big, but I have a favorite one which I absolutely like, and I stick to it, or I try to stick to it. He says, when he was asked, what is eloquence? Do you know what eloquence is? It's the best way of transmitting a message, right? So, for example, when we have Nahjul Balagha, it's called a peak of eloquence, the best of words. So he was asked, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, what is eloquence? And he says, it is to express an idea in as few words as possible. My goodness, it's so hard, so hard. Basically, it's a hadith of the Prophet when the Prophet said, Khairul kalam kalla wa dalla. The best of talks is short and to the point. And that's what Imam Sadiq says. So we tried really hard, and that's why we did Q bites. We try to put everything in a bite. And if we go over a certain number of minutes, my goodness, we think we're not following this hadith of Imam Sadiq. So you know what? Today, a day to reflect on his life. A day to think what you can take from his life and how you can apply it to your life. That, in essence, is what learning about the Masumin is all about. So can I have a really loud salawat, please? Oh, salah ala nabi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraja. So I make sure that with every imam, I write things down. Can you see that? And I get a little post-it note as well. So make sure you have something written about each imam, about each surah that you learn, about each aspect of the dua that you learn. And you'll be able, I know many of you use iPads or phones or computers or whatever, but there's nothing like writing it down to make you remember stuff. Try. Works really well. Okay, so let's look at Surah Yaseen now. Okay, before we recite it, I'm going to go over the benefits again. Recommended to seek Allah's blessing and happiness, preferably after Fajr. It's like reciting the whole Quran 12 times. You recite it once, it's like 12 times Quran. Forgiveness of sins. If you recite it with somebody who's ill, then for every word, Allah sends 10 angels who ask forgiveness for the patient. It saves you from troubles. If you've got any hajat, I've talked about this before, 2 rakats namaz, recite Surah Yaseen. If you just listen to it being recited, the thawab is 20 hajj. Imagine 20 years going to hajj, and you get the thawab by listening, not hearing, listening. Okay, listening to the words. The Prophet said, if you recite it in the graveyard, Allah reduces the punishment on the person in the grave and He replaces it with goodness. And that reminds me of the dua of Imam Sajjad that we recite before every namaz. Ya muhsinu kadatak al-musi, or the one who does ihsan in front of you is the sinner. فَتَجَاوَزْ عَنْ قَبِيهِ مَا عِنْدِي بِجَمِيلِ مَا عِنْدَكَ يَا كَرِيمُ. Change what is bad in me to what is good in you. And Imam Sadiq says, if you recite it in the day, it will keep you safe for the whole day. If you recite it at night before going to bed, it will keep you safe. Angels will watch over you. So we've divided the surah into various sections. You can see them there. There's 7 sections. The first section is ayah 1 to 12. And we looked at it and it talked about the mandate of the Prophet. Remember, we did that. Section 2, we looked at the whole story about Antioch and Habib al-Najjar. In section 3, we looked at the signs of nature, which we did last week. And this week, we will look at section 4. And section 4 is ayah 45 to 50. And it's about tawbah and infaq. Tawbah is repentance. And do you know what infaq is? Infaq is sharing. And it's just matching up what we talked about charity. Giving in the way of Allah. So let's go over each ayah and then we will recite Surah Yaseen. So ayah 45 says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ, and when it is said to them, اتقوا, be God conscious. ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون. Safeguard yourself, be conscious, God conscious about what is in front of you and what is behind you, so that you may receive mercy. What Allah is telling us is, reflect on your past, know the consequences, beware of them, do tawbah, have taqwa against your sins, and also look at what is your future. Try and make plans for something that will make you reach your full potential. Then he says, the moment you do that, when you plan for the future to be righteous, he will have mercy on you. When you start looking at your past and making sure that you've asked for forgiveness, he will have mercy on you. وَمَا تَعْتِيهِم مِّنْ آيَةٍ, he says, and there doesn't come to them a sign, مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ, from the signs of their Rabb, إِلَّا كَانُوا عَنْهَا مُعْرِضِينَ. But you know what? They turn away. There are signs of Allah everywhere. There was an old man who had made this is a metaphor, it's a story, who made a promise to the angel of death, who said, I will let you know when I come. So one cold night, he was sitting in his home, and the angel of death knocked on the door. He just walked in and said, time up. He said, but you promised me, you would tell me when you would come. He said, I did. Don't you see your white hairs? Don't you see your bones hurting now? Don't you see your skin getting wrinkled a bit? You're getting old. These were all signs of me coming to you. Didn't you see them? It's really important to understand what Allah is saying here. Then he says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ, when they are told, أَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ, spend, give, share of your money, give charity from what Allah has given you. قَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, those who cover up the truth say, لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, to those who believe, نُطْعِمُ مَن لَّوْ يَشَاءُ اللَّهُ أَطْعَمَهُ, shall we feed those whom if Allah wanted He would feed them? إِنْ أَنْتُمْ إِلَّا فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Allah says you are in clear error. Is that the argument you have? So that's generally the argument from the rich when it comes to helping the needy. Why doesn't Allah give it to them? Oh, we've worked hard for it. Why should we give it to them? They see themselves as separate from Allah. So it's that I, that arrogance of that I. And Allah says, وَيَقُولُونَ مَتَى هَذَا الْوَعْدُ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And they say, when will the promise come to pass if you're being truthful? Remember we talked about it in Surah Al-Ma'arij, about the man who said, send down the punishment if you want. And Allah says, if they don't understand that they will have to be buried one day, they will die one day, and they will never understand. And then he said, مَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَّا صَيْحَةً وَاحِدَةً. They're only waiting for a single shout. تَأْخُذُهُمْ وَهُمْ يَقِسِّمُونَ. It will take them over and they'll still be arguing about what they have, what they don't have. They'll still be arguing. And then finally, فَلَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ تَوْصِيَةً وَلَا إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهِمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. And it will come at a time when they won't be able to make a will and they won't be able to return to their families or what they're familiar with. Their world will end and there's no possibility of action. So while God has given us life, we've got to do the best we can. So if you're ready, let's recite Surah Yaseen up to Ayah 50. Are you ready? Yes? Okay, let's start. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم. إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم. لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب عليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يرقبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق الرسول الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Right, we got to remember our marhumin today. Like the marhumin, those who are ill, really remember them. I'm going to tell you a story so it stays in your head. So, in the olden times, cities used to have walls around them. There were gates and walls. You couldn't just enter a city just like that. So when the people went to the mosque in the morning for Fajr in Masjid al-Nabi, as Medina, the Prophet was already there, and he was so upset. There was tears rolling down his eyes, and they said, "What happened?" And he said, "I have news." And they said, "Well, who came? What's the news? Why are you so upset?" He said, "Yo marhumin. Those people in your family who have died, they made me cry. They came to talk to me." And they said, "Ya Rasulullah, what happened?" He said, "Well, last night they visited your homes. And when they came, there was nobody who was thinking about them or praying for them or nothing. And they left so dejected and so upset. They were really sad." So we're told in a hadith that our marhumin, those who have died from our families, they come to visit us on a Thursday night, on the night of Friday, which is tonight, and they come and see what we're doing. Are we doing something for them? To recite Surah Al-Fatiha before we eat? Are we giving some charity for them, praying some salah for them? What are we doing? It's really important to remember them. So what we're going to do just now, recite Surah Al-Fatiha. I hope after Maghrib you will recite it too. And remember your marhumin, especially those of your family. Remember those who are ill. Please, 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 just close your eyes for a minute and think about them. And ask Allah to give them shafa and pray for those who are in trouble. We'll also read the dua for protection, and then we will end with the ziyarah of Abu Abdullah. You ready? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Close your eyes, look down, ask Allah to give the thawabs to all the marhumin, especially those of your family. Pray for those who are ill and those who are in trouble. لي خمسة أطفي بها حر الوباء الحاتمة المصطفى والمرتضى وأبناهما والفاطمة. لي خمسة أطفي بها حر الوباء الحاتمة المصطفى والمرتضى وأبناهما والفاطمة. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So inshallah I will see you on Saturday and next Thursday. Until then, stay safe, look after yourself. في أمان الله قريب. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم.